Hello friends, my name is Dr. Sushant Verma and today I am going to discuss a very important topic which is a part of paper 1. It is covered under the topic of human rights, and in that I am going to discuss Asian values debate. Now, to understand Asian values debate, first of all, what is Asian values debate? Now, Asian values debate emerged in 1990s, and Asian values debate was basically a political debate. It was highlighted by the Prime Minister of Singapore as well as Prime Minister of Malaysia. The Prime Minister of Singapore was Lee Kuan Yew, and the Prime Minister of Malaysia was Mahathir Mohamad. So basically they had highlighted this as a political debate, and Asian values debate aimed at highlighting the cultural bias which was there in the notion of universal human rights. They had said that the notion of universal human rights, it had a Western bias, and Asian values debate is a part of cultural relativist perspective on rights. So it's a part of cultural relativist perspective on rights. Now, cultural relativist perspective on rights, basically this cultural relativist perspective on rights, it has emerged from cultural relativism, which emerged in social anthropology. And cultural relativism basically said that what is the importance of the beliefs, ideas that has to be appreciated within a particular culture. It rejected the idea of a universal truth or universal values and said no culture can be considered as inferior or superior, but every culture is relative. So what is truth in one culture may be considered as untruth in another culture. So what is truth is basically determined by cultural context. So this cultural relativism emerged in social anthropology, and from it emerged cultural relativist perspective on rights. And cultural relativist perspective on right, it questions the notion of universal human rights. It says that the very notion of universal human rights. Now, universal human rights basically says that all individuals, irrespective of their background, that whether they belong to different culture, nation, religion, etc., they have a certain set of inalienable human rights. These are intrinsic in human nature, and that's how they consider human rights as a modern and secular version of natural rights. So cultural relativist perspective, it questions the universal human rights, and it says no, human rights are not universal. In fact, what are human rights? They are culture specific. What are human rights? They are culture specific. They vary from one culture to another, and you have to appreciate the notion of rights which is relevant in that particular culture. There cannot be a universal set of rights valid across the cultures. So basically they highlighted the cultural specificity of the notion of human rights, and they say that the very notion of universal human rights is nothing but an alien imposition. And in fact they say that it is a form of cultural imperialism, that how Western countries, they have imposed their notion of human rights throughout the world in the garb of universality of human rights. So they question the assumption of universal human rights and says what is right has to be understood only within a particular cultural context. So Asian values debate is a part of the cultural relativist perspective on rights, and likewise it questions the universality of the human rights and says right has to be appreciated in a cultural context. And cultural relativist perspective on rights would say that, for example, right of a person in China, right of a person in Nigeria, and right of a person in US, they differ as per the nationality, religion, culture, etc. An Asian values debate emerged as a part of cultural relativist perspective on rights. Now, to understand Asian values debate, we have to understand the context of emergence. Then we will be focusing on main themes of cultural relativist, this Asian values debate, and then we will take up the criticism. Keep in mind, Asian values debate, the very word debate, it says there has to be proponents and opponents of the term Asian values. And as I have said, the term was coined by Lee Kuan Yew and Mahathir Mohamad, and that's how the Asian values emerged in a highly political context in 1990s. And the context was the success of the tiger economies. Tiger economies, the countries of Southeast Asia in particular, Singapore, South Korea, Thailand, Hong Kong, they had achieved tremendous economic progress, and along with China. Now, China had opened its economy in 1978. So many of these tiger economies, they had one thing in common, that they were the authoritarian government. They were the authoritarian government. And the success of these tiger economies was the context of emergence of Asian values. And here in 1993, there was going to be a World Conference on Human Rights in Vienna. And the 1993 Asian Bangkok Declaration, it highlighted the notion of Asian values. So basically, Asian value says that human rights, rather than being universal, have to be seen in a cultural perspective. That what is notion of human rights shall be valid only within a particular culture, that is Asian culture. It was in that context the ideas of Asian values debate emerged. Now, moving on to the main themes of Asian values debate. And according to a renowned scholar, Yvonne Tew, he says that the concept of Asian values debate has three main themes. First, universal versus particularism. Second, individualism and communitarianism. Third is political and civil rights versus socio-economic rights. The very first theme, it says universalism versus particularism. So universalism, as I have already said, is the idea that all human beings, they possess this common humanity, and human rights reflect that common humanity. In fact, they say that human rights are a demand of all humanity on all humanity, and they reflect the common human essence, which is universal throughout the world, irrespective of the background of the person. That despite belonging to different nations, religion, culture, ethnicity, they share one thing, common humanity, and human rights reflect that common humanity. It is valid throughout the world. So these inalienable rights are available to everybody throughout the world. Now, this universalism is questioned by proponents of Asian values debate. And they say that instead of universal nature of human rights, which they consider as alien imposition, which they consider as a form of cultural imperialism of the West, because human rights are based on the cultural values of the Western countries, which are imposed on others. And arguing from the cultural relativist perspective, they say what is human right has to be seen in that culture's context. And they say that what are human rights, they should reflect the Asian values, which are very important in Asian culture. So human rights should reflect the Asian values. Now, what are these Asian values? These Asian values, they say, Asian values like belief in family. Family is a very important part of Asian life. Respect for authority, all types of authority, whether it is authority of the parents, authority of teachers, authority of the government, and you have to show loyalty and respect to that authority. Instead of competition, you have to Asian values, in fact, they promote social harmony. Social harmony is more important than competition. Keen work ethic, hard work and thrift savings, and preference to duty over right. So in Asian values, they do not emphasize on the notion of rights. Rather, they give preference to duty, that every person has to perform the duty. And in fact, if you recall, Mahatma Gandhi also believed in the same thing. Mahatma Gandhi, in fact, had said that if an individual performs his duties, his rights will be automatically taken care of. So even Gandhi, he supported priority to performance of duty over rights. So what is human rights in Asian society? They should be based on these Asian values, and these Asian values, they reflect the particular history, the particular culture and religion of Asia, and that's how they form an integral part of Asian culture. And hence any notion of human rights, rather than being based on Western value system which is projected as universalistic, in fact they should be culture specific based on these Asian values. And this is the first point of debate. They say universalism versus particularism. Second theme is individualism and communitarianism. Now Lee Kuan Yew, he had said, Lee Kuan Yew had famously said that Asia has never valued individual over society. Individual over society. In Asia, it is the society or community which is more important than the individual. So Lee Kuan Yew and others argue that the Western notion of human rights considered individual as a right bearers, and hence it is based on idea of individualism. Individualism, as you all know, means supreme importance to individual over society, community or state. In contrast, the proponents of Asian values debate, they say no, human rights shall be based on culture of Asia, and culture of Asia has always given priority to community over that of an individual. And that's how they say social cohesion. These Asian values, they promote social cohesion, and this is important for stability and prosperity. And in fact, they say it is duty towards a community which is more important than the individual rights. So basically this is how they say, rather than individual being important, what is important is community. So notion of rights shall be based on rights of the community rather than rights of the individual. The third is political and civil rights versus socio-economic rights. And here, the proponents of Asian values, they say that for countries of Asia, which are poor countries, which are developing countries, what is priority? Their priority is economic development. That is their priority. And for economic development, what they need is an authoritarian government. So authoritarian government is conducive for development. In fact, they say that political and civil rights are the luxuries, quote unquote luxuries, which Western countries can afford to have because they are developed nations. We are not developed. So for us, it is economic development which is more important than political and civil rights. And that is how Singapore is called as guided democracy, where they say that people prefer not political and civil rights, but they prefer economic development. And this is how China also justifies. In fact, China's record on respecting human rights has been criticized by Western countries. Whether you see what China does in Tibet, what China does in Xinjiang region, or what China, in fact, the infamous Tiananmen Square incident, where China had a brutal crackdown on students protesting for democracy. More than 10,000 students were brutally killed by Chinese state. And even today, if you go to China, if you search in any search engine in China, Tiananmen Square incident, it will not come. So China justifies it by its showcasing its record, impressive record on economic development, that how China has uplifted millions of people, more than 300 million people out of poverty, and China is today the world's second largest economy. So point is that they say that Asian values emphasize that economic development is important rather than socio-economic development. Economic development is important rather than political and civil rights. And this also, if you see in democracy, it also came to be known as Lee thesis, where Lee Kuan Yew had said that democracy is not suitable for development. For carrying out rapid development, you need an authoritarian government. And he said that as compared to China, India will be a land of unrealized potential because of its democracy. So he was impressed by China's rapid economic development, which was facilitated by authoritarian form of government. So that is how they say that Asian values give priority to social economic development rather than over political and civil rights. And one thing is fact that Singapore is today one of the largest investor in India. See the level of SDI in Singapore, it's quite high as compared to India. Lee thesis vouches for the same thing. So three main themes of Asian values debate: universalism and particularism, individualism and communitarianism, and the third is political and civil rights and socio-economic rights. In fact, Asian values debate says that political legitimacy of a regime, this is a very important point, they say political legitimacy of a regime is tied not to regime giving political and civil rights, rather it is tied to socio-economic rights. So for us, development is a more important than giving people political and civil rights. And hence any regime which facilitates that will be considered as legitimate in the eyes of the people. So basically these were the three debates of the three main themes of the Asian values debate. Now coming to the last part, it talks about the criticism of Asian values debate. And criticism of Asian values debate is obviously will be done by the liberal scholars. Okay, and this criticism you can see. In fact, in 1997 there was a massive economic crisis in Southeast Asia, East Asian financial crisis, 1997, and in fact it is these Asian values which were held responsible for this financial crisis. Why? Because Asian values, the critics said, do not promote entrepreneurialism. They do not promote rugged individualism. Rugged individualism, that's what Robert Nozick had said, egoistical individualism. That individual owes nothing to society, society owes nothing to the individual. And third was, they had said that how deference for authority, loyalty. So all these three factors, they were responsible for East Asian financial crisis. Had they followed the Western value system, this crisis would not have occurred. This was one main criticism of Asian values. Second is, Asian values is also said that it's an excuse for authoritarianism. Keep in mind, whether China or all the tiger economies, Singapore I mentioned, they were authoritarian form of government which deny political and civil rights to its people. And this is what the liberals say, that Asian values emerged as an excuse to promote, authoritarian regimes, and hence it was criticized on that ground. Now Amartya Sen's capability approach, he was critical of the narrow concept of development which was supported by Lee Kuan Yew and others, where Amartya Sen says they limited development to only economic development, and Amartya Sen says no, development has to be conceptualized in a broader term, where development has to be seen in terms of capability expansion. And as you are aware, Amartya Sen capability says it is the freedom which individual has to choose between good conceptions of life, that is a sort of valuable functionings. Functionings are beings and doings. One of their functioning is to be healthy, to be able to read, to be able to participate in community life. So Amartya Sen says development has not only to be considered only in terms of per capita income increase, but development has to be conceptualized in a broader term, and this development means capability expansion. And Amartya Sen says human rights are an integral component of this capabilities. If you are denying political and civil rights to the people, it means you are stunting their development. And hence Amartya Sen criticized the exponents or the proponents of the Asian values because of their narrow concept of development. Now Dalton and Ong, they say the way Asian values, they project that that Asia is a homogeneous continent and Asian values are same for all different regions of Asia, that is a myth. In fact, they question the homogeneous nature of Asian values, and they say, in fact, if you see Asia is a very diverse region. From West Asia to Southeast Asia to East Asia, you find different value system operate. In West Asia, it is political Islam in many countries. And in China, for example, there is not one single value system which influences China. In China, we find Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, along with Maoism. So even in China, there are competing value systems. So point is, they question the notion of homogeneous Asian values, and they say no, they betray the reality of diversity of Asia, where each region of Asia had distinct culture, distinct political history, and we cannot paint every region of Asia with the same brush of homogeneous Asian values. And in fact, after the East Asian financial crisis, in fact, Francis Fukuyama, remember, Francis Fukuyama, he is famous for his end of history thesis. He says liberalism has emerged as the unchallenged ideology. Triumph of liberalism, what he famously said. And Francis Fukuyama said that Asian values has become a discredited ideology, and those who keep on supporting Asian values, he says, it's like flogging a dead horse. The horse is already dead. Even if you keep flogging the horse, it will not be of any benefit. So basically, he says Asian values has been discredited. So Asian values debate, first it emerged in a highly politicized manner. It was a political debate, and in second phase, it emerged as a debate among the academics. But here, Yuan Tu, the same person who gave the three themes, now Yuan Tu says, even today in countries of Singapore as well as Malaysia, though the term Asian values is not used, but this ideology is still intact. And unlike democracy in West, in democracy in West, one of the important components of democracy is independence of judiciary. But in countries of Singapore and Malaysia, the political system continues to be guided by Asian values. And you can see the courts in these countries, they always differ or respect the authority of the executive there, even though technically speaking there is constitutional supremacy in these countries. So that is how deference for authority, especially of the executive, is a part of the political system of Singapore and Malaysia, and that is how they reflect the Asian values. And one more thing I would like to say before I conclude, that the concept of human rights, if you see, is also mentioned in paper 2, that is paper 2 section A, topic number 11, contemporary global concerns, where human rights is also one of the component. And whatever knowledge you get in while discussing human rights in paper 1, that is applicable in discussing human rights in paper 2. And that's how we teach in the class in an integrated manner. So Asian values debate questions have been asked in paper 1 as well as paper 2. And this concept is useful for you in both the papers, paper 1 as well as paper 2. So thank you all of you. Thank you.